Welcome to Building a Life of Purpose. The father of green building shares his social entrepreneurship journey with David Gottfried. I put him in purple because when it comes to sustainability, he's kind of royalty. I want to acknowledge that this special event is sponsored by the Elfenworks Center for Responsible Business, the St. Mary's College School of Economics and Business Administration, and Net Impact. So thank you to all our sponsors. I also want to give a special thank you to some of the people who are here. First of all, Dr. Lauren Spieth, who's the trustee and founder of the Elfenworks Foundation. The Elfenworks Foundation is the reason the Elfenworks Center for Responsible Business exists. Without their support, we could not have events like this, like the one we're having today. So extra gigantic thank you to Lauren. I also want to acknowledge that Don Gibson, our Dean of the School of Economics and Business Administration at St. Mary's, and Berna Aksu, who's our Associate Dean at the School of Business here at St. Mary's, are also here. I also want to acknowledge all our students. A lot of the students who are here are currently either taking my Science of Wellbeing or my Psychology of Becoming Happier class. And this has really been a difficult time as we look over, it's been over a week that there have been fires raging so close to us here in Southern California. And eco-anxiety is a topic that is very much in the minds of psychologists today. And one of the things that we can do with the distress we have about the environment is to remember that the well-being of the planet and the well-being of us as individuals are very closely linked. Not only does the well-being of the planet affect us, but we can affect the well-being of the planet. And so it's very timely that we have a speaker who's done so much for sustainability and can remind us that we can also do something to help take care of the planet that we all love and value so much and need so much. Also want to thank Net Impact for co-sponsoring the event, David Gottfried for attending and being our guest speaker. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and everyone else who's here today. And I'd actually like to take some time to find out who's here today, where are you all from? So if you can let us know in the chat, I've got a few questions for the audience. First of all, what city are you zooming in from? We want a sense of where everyone is coming from. Fantastic. And we've got a lot of the Bay Area. We've got some people from San Francisco. So lots of the Bay Area, but we also have Atlanta and Culver City, which is Washington, D.C. Fantastic. So it's not just California, it's not just local. So thank you for all the local people who are here. And also thank you for the people who are from the East Coast and from the South and all over the country. If you could also let us know where you work or go to school, if you're not working or go to school, where you hang out, just your kind of the place that you consider your primary affiliation. Oh, we've got people from Portland as well. This is fantastic. I'm looking at the locations. A lot of people are from the St. Mary's community. A few of you are from other places. That's fantastic. Really great to see the nice mix. And then finally, what's your primary role? It's my last question for the audience, and then we're going to give you all a break from having to participate in the chat. I've got retired people, I've got students, I've got professors, I've got someone who works in LEED certified buildings. Well, doesn't that make sense? I've got an oncological coach. I mean, this is wonderful. I've got a sustainability consultant. I've got an interior designer. I've got SEBA staff, students, faculty, coaches, architects, multiple architects. I've got a grandfather, I've got some retired people. Let's hear it for the grandparents and the parents and for everybody else. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great to see such a broad audience here today. All right. Couple of announcements before I introduce our speaker, which is why we're all here. First of all, in terms of logistics, we're going to take questions at the very end, and the speakers agreed to stay and answer your questions. The questions will be taken from the Q&A section. So if you look at your panel, there's a place that says Q&A, and you can type in your questions there. We may not have time for all the questions, but the best way to have a chance of having your question answered is to post it in the Q&A. You can post questions at any time during the event, but we won't actually take questions until the end. So just so you're clear on that. We also have a chat. The chat's mainly for answering questions like you just did, letting us know where you're from, what you're doing, and all of that. but the chat can also be used to make comments, so feel free to use it for that. Q&A is just for questions that you're hoping he'll be able to address at the end of his talk. All right, so that's the logistics. We are here to hear David Gottfried, the father of green building, tell us about building a life of purpose, which is important to well-being, important to the planet, important to all of us, and discuss his social entrepreneurship journey. David is the founder of the US and World Green Building Councils with chapters in over 80 countries. He was formerly a real estate developer and contractor, and he was making a very good living. But for those of us who are thinking about the triple bottom line, David really went all out and made a career shift and decided to focus his professional and brain skills on making a difference in the world in the context of sustainability. He's currently the Chief Commercial Officer at Blue Planet. He's the author of the award-winning book, Explosion Green. And his former home in Rockridge, California was the highest rated LEED certified home in the world and was featured in the Discovery Channel, which is pretty amazing. Way before I met David, I walked by that home and was awe-inspired and moved by it. So that is the introduction. And now for the part you all came for, not to hear me ramble, but to hear David, I'm going to stop sharing my slides. And David, take it away.
Thank you, Michal, and so great to be here with everybody. Thank you for coming from all over the world to hear me and share some thoughts about the future and green building and fires and your lives. Half of you are students at St. Mary's. I used to live in Moraga in your neighborhood for 6 years. Love the area. And today we're going to dream a little bit. We're going to think about the future and talk about life and why are we here. So we'll get a little spiritual, a little broader. We'll have some time at the end for questions that you can even start writing in chat now. And Michal will organize those for the end.
Oh, here's a correction. Put your questions in Q&A.
Okay, very good.
Sorry, it's confusing. Sorry about that.
And I hope, can you see the screen here?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. And thanks for that introduction. And just to give you a broader orientation of my background, which helps to understand my words and the stories that I'm going to tell you. This is a short resume in a way. But important to start with, I grew up in Los Angeles and went to Pacific Palisades High School that's mostly gone. And so my personal life story ties into the journey as well. I also remember from those early days growing up in LA, water shortages where we kept and used the bathtub water and gas lines as well, and fuel prices went crazy. And those influenced me as I went to Stanford and became an engineer and learned about solar engineering. But also at Stanford, we had Paul Ehrlich talking about population growth. And we read books by Amory Lovins, who's kind of the guru of energy efficiency. And those things started to wake me up, especially designing my little model of a solar home was in 1980, and I made it net zero. And they played into my head, and I started to learn about Earth and terms that Danelia Meadows taught us about carrying capacity on Earth. How many humans can the Earth sustain? And when are we over? And we've been way over for long time at 3x to 4x the carrying capacity, now at 8 billion. 10 years in real estate development and construction, non-green, seeing focus that was on square footage and making money, but not ecological footprint, not energy efficiency, not water efficiency. The term of indoor air quality hadn't been invented when I started, but it turned out to be a phenomenal underpinning for what you'll hear and see. And all of those earlier bullets led to my dreaming here as a dreamer. And my father, Ira, who's passed on the bottom right, said, "You always said you wanted to change the world." So even though I studied finance and engineering and even pre-med, I wanted to do more with my life. I wanted to find passion and make an impact. And that led to founding the U.S. Green Building Council first in '93. And then in '98, I started the World Green Building Council with GBCs in 80 countries now, sharing that US model. And it's quite incredible. We'll talk more. The next step in kind of a journey is getting into consulting and venture work with clean tech and green tech products and creating a network business as well. Bringing together manufacturers, a lot of startups, along with multi-billion-dollar firms. I finished that work. I started a health business I ran for 8 years, which we sold. And after that, I didn't know what to do. Should I retire like some of my friends or work more? And I wanted to work on climate change because we really hadn't addressed that. And we'll talk more about embodied carbon is what I thought was the elephant in the room of climate change, which is the CO2 going into these products that we make and accounting for that, not just the operational carbon, but also the first cost of carbon I got in our cars, our shoes, our homes, our product. How much CO2 goes into that? And could I work at helping reduce it? Written 3 books. I had a podcast show with 80 episodes. All of this is part of the story of teaching and giving back and planting seeds for change and trying to use what I learned in my studies to have an impact. And really what we're talking about here is impact on a hurting world that we're seeing in Los Angeles. We're seeing it in our rising oceans. But also for flavor, I'm a dad and dog owner, painter, cycling through Moraga a lot, going up Pinehurst, up to Grizzly Peak, and other fun things. I'm friends through Blue Planet with Dennis Hayes, who founded Earth Day in 1970. Some of you might remember that. And he gave me this quote for my speeches and a speech I did in Hong Kong last year for the 54th Earth Day. But despite starting in 1970, this precious earth, our home, is still hurting. And he encourages in his quote here to think about our precious ecosystems in those future generations. And you students, in your careers, that's something so important. Not just thinking about making your money for your future families, your family, and your homes you want to buy, but can the money you make, the businesses you work for or start, can they help sustain and regenerate these future generations? And that's very much at heart with Earth Day and Dennis's dreams, in that we finance pulling the CO2 out of the atmosphere in our creations, these gigatons. And there's about 50 gigatons we need to deal with here on Earth. And at the end of the day, your last breath, think about stewardship and impact. And did you inspire? All of my speaking career, which is about 40 years, I've used this far side slide. And unfortunately, it's still apropos. This precious little home is hurting, and we're seeing it. Not just the fires and the floods and the hurricanes, but the wars. We're still, unfortunately, killing each other and haven't evolved to where we need to go. I believe technology's really evolved, but I'm not sure about humans. And we need to accelerate our own evolution, probably in our brains, being less amygdala, that hot amygdala dominant, and getting more to the prefrontal cortex where logic and thought can take over. And that's where AI could play with a sustainable or even a regenerative operating system, which I'd like to start working on. I've my whole life looked for mentors and people I could study who could help guide me with a map and a destination and a compass, and people who are curious and ask the questions. And like you, we all read a lot. And Paulo Coelho wrote The Alchemist, and this quote is from his book, Aleph. And I know only that a life without cause is a life without effect. And I'm imploring the students here particularly to think about what your cause is. Think about in the time you have here, we don't know how much, what kind of impact, what kind of effect do you want to have? And we'll talk about that a little bit more today. But it's so important to think about that map, the compass, and the destination. It's curious that Paulo, when he was growing up like me as a dreamer, his parents thought he was crazy. And I'm sure mine thought the same when I quit real estate development and came home and said, guess what, Dad? I'm going to start the U.S. Green Building Council. It's a nonprofit. And he was a real hardcore businessman who did give me a lot of my tools. But he said, son, don't come home when you're starving. So he did think I was crazy, but not my whole life. But that dreamer never died. Paulo was like that, so they put him 3 times in mental institutions. And then they tried to make him a lawyer, and he didn't want to do it. And he trekked on the Camino de Santiago, and it changed his life. He was from Brazil, that's in Spain, and then he became a writer. And he wrote 30 books to 300 million people. So dreaming is okay, writing's great, and getting deeper in cause. In my background, there's a term in Hebrew called tikkun olam. And this stuck with me very deeply and has guided my life almost in a divine way. And tikkun means to repair, to restore, and olam is our world. And there's this 1400s Talmudic script by the Baal Shem Tov that the sacred light of God was in a beautiful glass vessel, and it shattered. And all those shards went all over the world. And our job is to collect the shards and glue them back together so that that light can shine and be sacred again and be renewable. And so a lot of my work, I look at that as I'm trying to gather these broken pieces and glue them together to allow that renewability to shine in our souls, in our spirit, in our work, in our buildings we design, in our creations, and in our kids. You got to teach them about this home, the earth. We haven't found a second home. Elon Musk is trying hard, but best I can tell, this is where we're living. We share the air, we share the oceans, we share the ecosystems, and Earth doesn't care where these country borders are. Doesn't care about the cultures or different races. We are all living here on the same Earth. And instead of just working on plan A's and B's, I work on plan L's. What's your legacy? What's that life well lived? What's a life of purpose and passion? And how can we collaborate and treat each other as true brothers and sisters? One of the greatest challenges as we think about Earth is climate change. And we're seeing that in LA in those fires, unfortunately. And the slope is very steep. And even with all green building inventions and solar and wind and this and that, we're just keeping the slope steady. But we're not getting to the net zero goals we have. Many countries signed the Paris Agreement to get to net zero by 2050 and to be half at 2030. And almost 0 countries are getting there. We go to the COP meetings every year. This year's COP 30 in Brazil. Last year was in Azerbaijan. And the UN, who runs all this, they report some of the statistics of COPs. It's kind of hiding behind this is being recorded, but they're recording press conferences and climate action events and side events and negotiating hours. But those things are not changing the slope. We need to get to results, not effort, as we'll talk about. And when we study the gap reports, we see we're past 1.5 degrees C now, which is what we wanted to hold Earth to in our national commitments, but we're headed towards 3 degrees C. Another great mentor I had personally was David Brower, and he's done so much when he did live, and when he passed in 2000, some of us were at his life celebration. And you could look around the room in Berkeley at 2,000 people celebrating him. Not his great wealth, but his impact, his inspiration, his teaching, and all these organizations he helped found or run. He was the first executive director of Sierra Club. He started Earth Island Institute in Berkeley as an incubator for startups and Friends of the Earth. He was a mountain climber and was in the first mountain, the 10th Mountain Division in the war, and taught them how to bring mountain climbing. But he influenced so many with his life, and you could hear it in his words. And it wasn't a funeral, it was a life celebration. And there's an Inc. article 2 decades ago that said, imagine you're at your own funeral. Who's there and what are they saying about you? And I asked you, what do you want to hear? And are you living that life now? Have you had that legacy of what you would like to hear? And if not, you now can make a map, a compass, and a destination by taking a piece of paper after this talk of what you want to hear at your funeral, and then re-navigating your life in that direction. And I found that very helpful. But David made time to meet me and have lunches, and also make waffles on Sundays for anyone who walked in his front door. He and I had a project together that he challenged me to write the Earth Commandments. And I stumbled for a while and didn't want to write them because I was afraid it was too big and too religious, and I didn't want to touch the 10 Commandments. And I kept saying to him, who am I to write them? But this is how he influenced people. He would say, David, when are we going to go up the mountain with our new commandments instead of coming down as Moses did? He said, no problem. I'll get access to Mount Sinai. My friend who unfortunately passed recently was Jimmy Carter, and he gave the Sinai to Egypt. He'll allow us to go up the mountain. So finally, I wrote the first 5, which are kind of obvious. And, we should live in harmony and protect and preserve, restore Paul Ehrlich's work to not multiply beyond, which we have, of course, and the stewardship of embracing and cherishing. And as I gave him the first 5 on a framed poster at a restaurant called Sinbad's on the San Francisco waterfront, he looked at them and they looked out the window, and I thought, oh my God, I blew it. He doesn't like them, and he's watching the seagulls just dive bomb into the water, and he scratches his head and he turns to me and he says, these are great, David. I never thought you'd do them, but I wonder what we've forgotten. So I had to redo them all and add the 6th commandment, what have we forgotten? And I've given many speeches just on what we've forgotten. When I run meetings or go to meetings, and some of you I saw, and thanks for attending. We were recently at the USGBC California an advisory board meeting, and at the end I honored David Brower and I said to the group, what have we forgotten? And it's always so much. One of my inventions at 3 in the morning was called the value rings. And it's just a hierarchical model, but it's so simple that the value in life is life. It's the bullseye V1. And these creations of humans are further in the hierarchies, but second is life sustaining. Things we'll go to war for: the air, the water, food, security. But life sustaining allows life, but the bullseye of all inventions and creations in our studies is life. And then out of that, once you have life, you can build, and life sustaining, you build communities and economies, and ultimately in V4 get to life enhancers, a snowboard, David's blue bike that he loves. But you can't have that bicycle or the car or the house, you know, hurt life sustaining and kill life. And you can appreciate this in all your designs and keep it at the table. I have mentioned this already, but this is what keeps me up at night. It's the one thing I ask neurologists and psychiatrists and friends and mentors. I still can't understand why we as humans can't treat Earth as home, and why we think there's another home for us somewhere if you don't carry out your waste or recycle or worry about your water or the soil. You know, why would you pollute your own home? There's something wrong with the brain. And so we need to study more neurology and psychiatry and Darwinian and the amygdalas, and try to understand more and educate. Maybe there's a role for AI here, so everything you buy, make, design, do, work on can take into consideration these hierarchies and treat this as a precious resource. And understand that we are of nature. Nature is not here as our supermarket for our taking as we've treated it, and the externalities we've created, the pollution and the waste and the trash. But when we hurt nature, we hurt self. And the fires, we're seeing this a bit as well. Some of that is us hurting nature, and the rising temperatures and all the stronger winds and vegetation. It all plays in the water. And just trying to understand that. And there are laws of nature, and we have to follow them. We aren't outside and separate and other. It all fits into this thing I invented called the full equation. And it's pretty simple. We always think R, the resultant, equals the product. And if you just put your hand over the screen on I and W, we think, oh, that house we make, the kid we fathered or parented or taught equals that effort of what we put in. But we don't subtract all the inputs that went into that invention, that creation, that design, that construction, and the waste. Those are negative elements. There's so many inputs: energy and materials and resources and money and thought, and so much waste coming out of that, whether it's global warming, acidification of the ocean, soil turning to dirt, kids ending up in jail. It's all waste. One of the greatest wastes on life is intellectual waste. It's the building developer hiring the great team who does LEED buildings and net zero buildings and positive buildings. And day one, you go to the meeting and they say, guess what? We're over budget and we're late on schedule. And, they don't give them the space to make it great and use that budget in a way that has a life cycle impact, a triple bottom line profitability. And that's waste. I was a very early green consultant in the US. One of my projects was a big known city, and it was a big hospital. And we worked so hard, a great team, to make it a proud, good LEED building. And the budget and the schedule and this and that, and the project manager, taking the power of that role to his head, said, we're over budget. We need to do something about it. I've instructed the architect and engineers to take the green out of the building. It's like, what are you talking about? That's like the surgeon, working on brain surgery and cuts the heart out. And so you really have to think about all the inputs and the waste and the full product that you're trying to create. This is my father. Ira was a pilot and a management consultant, and a lot of what you're hearing and even being a public speaker came from him. But as his kid, this is the paperweight we grew up with. Do not confuse effort with results. And, you say, well, Dad, I tried so hard on that exam. I studied. I put in 22 hours. I worked through the weekend. I stayed up till midnight. I drank 18 cups of coffee. No, he wanted your report card on his dresser when you got it. Did you get the A or not? Or if it's a soccer game, it's the World Cup. He doesn't want to know how many times you passed the ball, ran up and down the field, how many oxygen breaths you took. You stare at the scoreboard. The scoreboard of Earth is climate change, that graph we looked at, and many other true scoreboards that look at ecosystems and full biosphere regenerations. So everything you're going to do in your future careers, you students, it's so important to think about results. Effort is okay, but the Earth needs much more than just trying hard. We need to make changes that don't have forest fires like we just had. And what we need is true impact in the metrics of Earth and at scale, real scale. I've done a lot of things that after I do them, I get hugs and people say, oh, that's great. But I feel a lot of my work, even with what I've done, is putting solar collectors on the Titanic. And there's no time for that anymore. We have to change those icebergs from melting and slow down all these things that are hurting the future. So urgency and time has to be in every calculation. My father, he wanted this on his tombstone. It's there with a little airplane. He flew with the Eagles. It was a good trip. So how do you guys want to soar in the time remaining here? How do you define good trip? How does Earth define it? How do the have-nots who don't have the lives that we have define it? And they would like you to do different impact at scale that helps all here, all the living and non-living. I've been privileged to work at Blue Planet and learn from our CEO, Dr. Brent Constance, about where's the carbon on Earth. And you can see most of it's in the lithosphere. There's actually not that much in the atmosphere at 830 gigatons, or even the oceans that are in mass balance. And one of those later shifts I did to try to have a life of purpose is to go to Blue Planet, because it's the biggest place and company and invention I could find to work on embodied carbon the way the lithosphere soaks up the carbon out of the ocean, which pulls it in out of the air and stores it in a man-made synthetic limestone, which a lot of the crust is made out of. And so at Blue Planet, this is our pilot factory in Pittsburgh, California, near us. If you're St. Mary's students, maybe 25-minute drive. And on the left side and in the middle is a flue gas stack from Calpine natural gas plant, which is quite huge. And on the bottom left is a small Blue Planet pilot factory. And in the middle and on the right, you can see our little pipe pulling the flue gas out of that big stack in the middle. You can see kind of an elbow on the bottom. We pull it out of there across the street, and we're making synthetic limestone on the right that looks like limestone coral reefs. And we stuff it in different places. We're pre-commercial, but these are the options as we scale. And we have very big partners who will help us, Marathon and Chevron and Mitsubishi. but it can go as sand or gravel and land reclamation projects, road work, coastal protections. These are all the opportunities. We're studying prefab panels. I think you can see me. This is what it looks like in concrete. So this is just an attempt to not just get to embodied carbon scope 3 CO2 emissions, but to create more points on my scoreboard of contribution and trying to take whatever influence or network I have or intelligence to put more of those shards of glass back together and shifting from real estate development or the health business I'm in to the next need, and not just sitting in one place to make more money, but trying to put more pieces in the puzzle of the solution. Another thing I invented is called Build Move, and I taught it in 2 3-day courses at 1440.org. And this is trying to synthesize how we built the US and World Green Building Councils and answer the question, why us? How did we get to be in 80 countries? How did we touch trillions of dollars? So it's a synthesis of that, and this is in the back of my book, Explosion Green. In part 3, it says, why us? I'd like to share real fast with you this how to build a movement 7-step framework that perhaps you could use in your next invention or your job you're doing, or in some capacity I never thought of. Open up that dreamer in you. And it's 7 steps here that seem to fit everything we did in building the Green Building Council movement. And it always starts where I like to start with step 1, follow your passion, your PPM, what's your passion, purpose, and mission. If you don't have passion for something, you're not going to climb that steep mountain. You're not going to stay out on that mountain when it's raining on your head and thunderstorms. You aren't going to stay the journey. When we were building the US Green Building Council, I remember even before it launched in 1992, we launched in April of 93 at the AIA, the American Institute of Architects in DC, but I worked 13 weeks in 92 in my friend Jeffrey's office that he gave me in San Francisco on Battery Street, right through every weekend. I drank way too much coffee. I remember once I couldn't even talk on a call because I had too much caffeine. But I was so passionate about inventing the Green Building Council and bringing it to life and having something that wasn't just in real estate that I understood, but something that could give back, something that could make that light more renewable and shine. But at a deeper level, I wanted it to shine inside me. I wanted my soul to feel purpose and live with passion, have that walk, fast pace walk of excitement. So you need this. You need to think about it. If you're in a job, you don't feel these 3 things, or you're in a major at school and you don't feel this, well, look deeply and shift. Shifting is important. And in the building industry, and some of you come from there, we took our PPM and put it in all these areas, and making how we design buildings and cities our personal mission so that they had 0 footprint. Or in Singapore, they had nature on the facades and everywhere. So every building was pulling in CO2 and kicking out oxygen, but also healing us inside as people. And we went after all these fields with the PPM of how we educate and teach. And it's really important to inspire, because at the end of the day, that's what walks out of the room. Are they inspired for a bigger life of purpose and passion, and pulling it into everything we make, do, teach? The second step is vision. And out of your PPM, what's your big vision? We were passionate about buildings, thousands of us, And we made it our mission to invent the Green Building Council, and then the World Green Building Council, and then other countries did green building councils they took what we did and brought it home, whether it was Brazil or South Africa or Kenya, Australia. And then out of that, they created a vision of greening their whole country's building industry and the 13 sectors. We had to teach them all and come together and have a big vision of defining green building and showing how to make it, and that it's cost effective and that it has a great impact, and puts those points on the scoreboard and operate it well and even deconstruct it so it can reuse the parts in a circular economy. We had a huge vision, and it actually ended up bigger than even our vision. It went global. But in that vision, how do you create a regenerative culture? And at a deeper level, what we're doing in the green building movement, in the regenerative movement and the regenerative movement's much bigger. It's in finance and health and oceans and agriculture and food. But we're redefining wealth to equal value, to also equal health and regeneration. And that's so important for everything we do. Sorry, my dog's scratching on my door. But regeneration is really the word. And we're reshifting the economy that our parents knew and our grandparents. And our dream, and this is in natural capitalism and deeper, that Hunter and Amory Lovins wrote with Paul Hawken, and Ecology of Commerce Hawken wrote. They're trying to get that every dollar of the future we make does good. And Amory Lovins taught us from Rocky Mountain Institute that a watt of energy saved is the same as a watt generated. So there's great value there, and that's a new form of value, and that should equal wealth. And in the Green Building Council movement, we're trying to get it so that if you want your building to be an A building and be at the highest level, or your company to have the price earning ratio at the top of your industry, and have the greatest market capitalization, that it's green, it's sustainable, it's renewable. And we're measuring this in social capitalism as well, looking at that, pulling that in addition. The triple bottom line has the profitability for the people, the planet, and also everyone involved. I call it accelerating hope, and I made this up where the H is health, O is on, P is planet, and E is earth. And so a life of passion and purpose has to accelerate hope. And in my podcast show called Regen 360, the 80 interviews were mostly of getting visionaries who I would interview to find out what they were doing. And at the end, I would ask them, what gives you hope? But I was trying to create and see hope in the interviews to sustain my soul. And it's so important that everything we do creates hope by accelerating the health on planet Earth. And a lot of my work has been in carbon the last years to try to realign so we have a hope that we can live within the Paris Agreement. But this is hitting in so many other areas, whether it's floods or fires. But there are other strategies you can do to put points. There's so much, unfortunately, to learn from the LA fires of what could have been done better. And we need all right now in our communities to have town halls and meetings, bringing those lessons learned locally and getting rid of the dead trees and the dead leaves and the trees too close to the homes, and having evacuation trials. And there's so much to learn as we build the bigger vision of a resilient Earth. And this is a great career for the future as well. The third step is, what is the blueprint out of that huge vision that you can design and build for whatever the movement is you're trying to create? And that blueprint should have nature at the heart and use what's called biophilic regenerative design, learning from nature and how we can design that next product, learning from nature the circularity, that there is no waste. And this is a project Bill Browning shared, a good friend from Terrapin Bright Green, but this is a Google building in New York they bought, several million square feet, and they made it into a data center. But in their vision was no waste of this building, in that it's a regenerative designed renovation for the data center. But they had to start with what's all the data of the building. And then they actually went back and looked at what was the footprint on that site from 1609, before that whole multi-city block building was there. What were the nature-based services that ecology provided to New York? And they measure that. And there's some 30 nature-based services that can be measured, whether it's solar energy or water services or carbon, biodiversity. And then they mapped it on the right on that old building that they renovated. But their goal was to do the same that nature did before the building was there. And this was the design thesis for Google as they did it and measured all that. And they had a big vision. They made the blueprint out of it, started with passion, pieces in the puzzle, gluing the shards together. And this is the forefront of design, is nature-based design, but also biomimicry and other mapping techniques. Janine Benyus is doing a lot of great work in this area, Bill Reed with Regenesis. These are the leaders of this new thinking. But there's products in these buildings that need to be invented as well. The fourth step here, oh, I'm sorry, one more vision. I mentioned the World Green Building Council. I want to just give you a sense of that, not just the 80 countries and all the partners, but we represent 50,000 organizations, not 50,000 people. One of these is a Google or a Apple or a Walmart. So it's touching 3 to 5 million green professionals all over the world. We have regional networks. We have impact areas. And we, in all of our rating systems in the 80 countries, LEED is one of them, but there's BREEAM that was invented in England, and Green Star in Australia, and Green Mark in Singapore, and CASB in Japan. These are all rating systems touching buildings with about 3.5 billion square meters of green building space on planet Earth. And if you use a simple number like $100 a square foot on it, and a lot of our buildings are, if you build in the Bay Area, a new home, it's $1,000 a square foot. But at $100 a square foot, we're at $1 trillion that we touched. So be bold and be big as they advocate. This is a whole group called the Building Decarbonization Coalition here, started in the Bay Area, that dreams of decarbonating the grid. Another big vision and a blueprint, and doing a lot of great work. We need to rebuild LA green. So here's a new movement that can start today, and think about new design guidelines, construction, green products, and even green financing and aggregated GPO of all these 20,000 structures. They all need windows and flooring and mechanical systems and batteries and solar to create a group purchasing organization. Another big vision I'm sharing. we've talked about a regenerative operating system, and here's how it can help in buildings, but it can go to people, I think, in all our decision making. Tribe, who's at the table? So important that you have everyone at the table to have an integrative, holistic conversation. And we had 13 sectors in the Green Building Council movement. One of these hats was an architect, an engineer, a product manufacturer, a student, a cleaning company, a scientist, a utility, a bank, a building owner. So who's at your table in your inventions? I love the tribe and the vision of Burning Man and their project, and I love their principles of how it brings people together and creates a new city with new rules and no waste. And there's a lot to be learned with their intention. I'm a cyclist and love Strava and how they bring athletes from 30 activities together through an app all over the world and are helping 100 million people with their vision and passion and blueprint and the tribe they're pulling together. I see and thank some of my tribe is here on this call. Certainly everything in the fifth step needs a benchmark. That's the scoreboard. And in green building, these are some of our rating systems. And this is what LEED looks like with its benchmark of a checklist and 110 points in all these categories. But what's your rating system in what you want to invent? What's your scorecard? Are you rating it? What are the important categories? I once did this for what is a green life for David. I called it LEED Life. And the categories were different, but health, family, sustainability, give back to community. So you can invent benchmarks out of it in all these areas. The sixth is the economics of it. If you don't bring money to the table and embrace it and change how that wealth is created based on value, as we've discussed, it won't work. Even if it's a nonprofit, you can go bankrupt. And nonprofits need to make a profit, as we did at the USGBC. We sold our Greenbelt conference and made so much money, we endowed the nonprofit. So money always is so important, but you have to look at the greenness of the money as well as the sustainability and regeneration of the money and the life cycle investments, not just in finance, but in terms of ecological impact of that first cost. In green building, these are some of the money areas we had to look at in the reports the GBCs did, but a real important one was the productivity of the occupants as well, health and productivity, so important. But risk, what's the insurance risk of not being green, of not being resilient? We're going to see the biggest insurance problems and reinsurance ever in LA, but we weren't as resilient as we could have been. And what are the carrots and sticks of finance? And the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of great carrots. The Title 24 Energy Code has some sticks as well. And the seventh step is just how do you sustain this movement you're building? How do you sustain yourself as a change agent? A big part of the Green Building Council movement are the networking events where we sustain each other and share our struggles and our wins and our losses and hug each other to keep our soul renewable, to keep climbing the steep mountain. It's so important. But how do you sustain the organization? How do you sustain the vision? How do you sustain the economics? And you need a whole plan just on this. Otherwise, most startups fail. Most NGOs don't have metrics at scale with urgency and speed to change that slope of CO2. And it's so important to keep that light in all of us renewable, but also here on Earth. And we're still struggling. And I look at my life and what you've heard and seen here on David's journey is really I'm a gardener. I plant seeds. I love planting seeds. Maybe you do too. And I love coming back and having diverse seeds and then watering them and pruning them and watching my little garden turn into a forest. And my dad always said, well, see that lead or greenbuild or whatever, that's your forest. Why aren't you out front there on the stage getting all the recognition? And I was much happier just sitting on that park bench quietly, or as a grandparent and watching the kids and the families and the dogs in the park and the trees shading us with the hot sun and the flowers bringing color and beauty, knowing full well it's not just restoring our spirit and soul and giving me a life of purpose, but it's helping everybody. It's inspiring and it has a purpose. It's not about me, it's about my contribution. It's about your contribution. It's about how you use your precious moments to have an earth that you're so proud of, to have a life at that last breath like David Brower had with the 2,000 people. It's about what Joseph Campbell wrote about, the hero's journey, and it always begins with the call. So don't miss that call inside. It's there. Can you hear that voice? Maybe it got fire hosed by parents or teachers or school, but we're all divinely inspired with the call, as Joseph Campbell talks about. And he writes, the herald or the announcer of the adventure. That's the call inside all of us. But it's often dark, it's loathy, it's terrifying, it's judge evil by the world. Yet if one could follow, the way would be opened through the walls of day into the dark where the jewels glow. And that's how I feel about this journey. And that's how I feel trying to ignite sparks of renewability. And I hope you'll join me in this journey. And many of you have been sustaining me and part of my sustenance plan. I can't thank you enough for trying to create a life of purpose and legacy as we build our Plan Ls, as we make money, yes, but we're proud of how we made money. So thank you so much for listening to me. It's a real privilege to be in the same community as St. Mary's and our global community. And we'll take some questions now and I'll stop sharing.
Fantastic. So we have a few questions posted in the Q&A, and I'm going to just read them out loud to save time. First of all, from Marlene Arian, I'm considering a career change coming from the education side. What would you be able to advise me on, or what advice do you have? I'm looking for some advice if I want to do education and sustainability. And then I have 3 more questions from my students that they sent me privately.
Well, good, you're questioning your career. We should always do that if it's not fulfilling us, supporting us and our families, but also bigger than just us. And maybe you've timed out there. The CEO doesn't have the right vision or passion, or you feel you can contribute more. You've mentioned education, sustainability. Good for you. That's where we need it. We need you. So, but dig back into these 7 steps. What's your greatest passion? Start there. Okay, it's sustainability, it's teaching, giving back. Awesome. Create a purpose around it. Well, maybe it is teaching. Where could you teach best? Is it a university like McCall? Is it elementary school? There's plenty to do there. Is it church or synagogue? And then create a mission around that. Create then the next step, the vision, the blueprint, create a game plan. And look at that. Look at the gaps and where we need it. I think even at an elementary school, every kid should not be able to graduate without their own thesis and do good for the school or the community in a little project. When they graduate, they share. I made my parents recycle. I taught all these people to have occupancy sensors that turn off the lights or whatever. We went on every monthly Sunday once a month and cleared leaves and shrubbery so it won't burn. So there's so much to do there, and there's so many inspiring teachers to learn from.
Thank you so much. So I think we have time probably for just one more question. So this is from one of my students who wrote, in our well-being class, we learned about acts of kindness and service helping to improve our own well-being. How has your work in sustainability made you happier? And has it made it easier to deal with the devastating fires in your hometown that you yourself work in this area, or has it made it more difficult?
Thank you. It's hard to be happy when your hometown burned and people you love evacuated. One of my best buddies' brother's house burned down in the Palisades, my high school. And so the happiness factor is a little rough there. But how do you deal with that? I always go to, well, help. I can help. We can donate money. We can donate jackets. We can come to where we're living now and take the lessons learned. And they're not doing it. I'm not getting any notices here. I don't see anyone out here raking leaves. And I need to do that. And I have a goal. Every Sunday, I'm going to fill up the green bin and I'm going to go with my rake and get everyone to do that. So there's a lot to learn from that. Happiness is not steady state, it's up and down. But even in the greatest disaster, if you can be of service and help and do good and put points on the scoreboard of Earth, it makes you feel better. If you're in a war zone, but you're helping people live or evacuate, or not freeze or share your food. There's always good that can be done. And some of the greatest good we see in our humans is in disasters. We saw that in 9/11, where we actually for a short time came together and helped and didn't care. We were all there to help. So there's a lot to learn out of that in your class, but it's a great topic to study.
Fantastic. Thank you so, so much. It actually reminds me, I saw news footage of some of the people who were actually volunteering in LA after they lost their homes. They were out and they were helping old people. They were helping look for animals, other people. They were helping their neighbors. And they were doing service. And one of the reporters interviewed one of the people who was doing it. And he said, how can you do this? You've lost your home and you're putting all your energy into helping all these other people. He said, it's the only way I can cope. It makes it so much easier to deal with it that I know I'm doing something. If I was just sitting in a hotel room not doing anything, it would be so much harder. So it really ties in with what you're saying, that we can make a difference. And when we do make a difference, it makes the world better and it makes us feel better as well. Though we should do it to help the world, it's a nice side effect that it helps our well-being as well. We are all out of time, but I want to thank everybody who's here, especially David. Obviously, Lauren for the Elfenworks Center, which wouldn't be here without the support of your foundation, the faculty, the staff, the students, the people from all over the country. I see people from as far away as Washington, D.C., and there might even be someone from overseas. I just want to thank you all and thank you, David. Really a great experience for all of us to learn about something that's going to be so important for us every day from now until eternity. So thank you again. Thanks to all of you. If you have any closing comments, David.
One word.
Those last comments. Thank you.
This isn't just do good. This is about the future of the economy and wealth. And so this is also the path to making the most money.
Oh, that's nice.
I want to just end that this is shifting capitalism so it understands Earth as home. But this is how you'll make money too. So I'm not just here encouraging you to hug trees.
So hug trees and make money. But thank you so, so much for participating and for being part of this wonderful event. Especially thank you to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for what you do and your great work. I appreciate it. I'm grateful.